Hello fly tyers. Today we're going to tie a size 12 Light Cahill Dry Fly. The hook shank on this size 12 is about 3/8 of an inch, and I have my thread stopped about an 1/8 inch behind the eye. Here I'm going to tie a wing of wood duck. I've notched out the center of the wood duck, and I'm going to tie this to the top of the shank with the curved side down with 2 loose wraps but firm, and I'm going to pull the feathers back until they're the length of the shank of the hook, which was 3/8 of an inch long. Balance is everything on a Catskill style dry fly. So I'm just a little bit beyond that. I could live with that, but I'll just give it a little tug. And now I have the feather the length that I want it, and I'm going to wrap over it with some firm wraps. Now I'm going to cut it, the remaining on an angle. This helps me keep a tapered body. Now that it's locked in firmly, what I'm going to do is push back on it and try to spread those fibers. Stand them up, pull back, and really force your thread up underneath them to make those wood duck fibers stand up. They're jammed against the thread wraps behind them. The next thing I'm going to do is try to separate them as evenly into 2 separate parts. I know this is hard to see from this angle, but what I'm doing is putting my fine scissors between them, and I've divided them. Now I'm going to take my thread and go through the middle of them once. Then I'm going to come up and wrap around the shank of the hook, and then I'm going to go through the middle of them again, and my thread is on the far side of the hook, and I'll go around one more time to lock it in. My next step is I'm going to pull them all together, and this takes some thread control. I'm going to go under the wing and through the 2 of them and drop the thread on the other side of the shank, and then pull up that wing into the proper position, and then do another wrap to lock it there. Now that one's standing up nicely when it's facing you, and I'm going to do the one that on my side, and I'm going to grab it with my fingers. Do the same thing around the outside of the wing and over the shank, and now I'm winding away from me again in the proper position. This takes a little bit of practice. Once you get it, it's pretty easy. I think holding them with your fingers helps. I didn't want to hold the side facing you with my fingers because I would block your view on what I actually was doing with the thread. Now I'm going to wind down to where I'm going to tie in my tail material, and for this I'm going to use Coq de Leon fibers. They're pretty light. They'll go with this, and they're very stiff, and they actually have spots in them, which I like. So I'm going to measure these to the shank. Again, remember the shank is 3/8 of an inch. So I'm going to measure these. Once I get my measurement, I'm going to change hands and position that right at my tie-in point. And a soft wrap, and I'll roll those tail feathers right up on top of the shank. And if my measurement was correct with the shank of the hook, they should just be about 3/8 of an inch. And they are close enough. Now I'm going to wind over them, and those will help me create my taper also. And any little bit that I have up at the front, I'll trim off. They are up on the top of the shank and the rear of the hook. So I'll trim off the few butt ends that I had left and wind over them with some nice thread wraps to create a tapered body. Now, if you were going to do any quill style body, this is very important so you have a nice smooth transfer moving up the shank. With dubbing, the smoothness is not as important. I'm going to use a turkey biot for my body material here in a yellow, pale yellow. When I tie this on, I'm going to tie it in at the very tapered end with a soft wrap at first, just to get it on, and then I'm really not pulling too hard because I don't want to cut this. They are pretty fragile. Now I'm locking it in real hard right there so it won't pull out when I start wrapping. I'm going to bring my thread up to where I am going to wrap this turkey biot. Now the first thing I'm going to do with it is to push it down and get it behind my hook at a 90-degree angle to the hook shank. And the next step just adds some strength to this because they are so fragile. I'm going to put a little bit of crazy glue on my thread wraps. Then I'm going to wrap turkey biot over that. If the turkey biot happened to fall apart, I gotta believe I could tie another one on later on. That super glue would hold the fly together to this point. So I clip onto the turkey biot with my hackle pliers, and then I'm gonna wrap, avoid that hook point that will cut it. One over the other. Just wrap right over the other one in front of it a little bit. And you'll come up to your thread where you're going to tie this off. Drop the thread over 2 or 3 times, then snug wrap in front of it. And now that it's anchored, I'm going to trim it as close to the body as I can. And bury the rest of what's left over with my thread. Now I'm going to come in front of that wing. And I'm going to build up a little bit of base here because that's where I'm going to attach my hackle. I know most people attach the hackle behind the wing and wind forward, but I don't like that unevenness of the body at this point. And I'm going to tie my hackle on here for another reason, and I'll explain that in a minute. But I'm going to have the curved side facing towards me, and I'm going to anchor that on just behind the eye with a couple good firm wraps. Not too many, you don't want to build up yet. Then I'm going to lock it in with a jam knot. I'm going to pull that hackle forward. You can see the curved side that is now facing towards the front of the hook, or the shiny or pretty side of the feather is facing towards the rear of it. And then I'm going to wrap a couple more good ones right in front of it, and then I'll trim. I have the thread out of my way with my hand. I'm going to trim that as close as I can, and that little stub that's left, I'll bury that eventually when I make my head. But in the time being, I don't have an even transfer for my hackle to travel on. So I'm going to build up between the wing and the hackle a little bit of thread wraps here. I'm using 8/0 thread, so it takes a little bit to build it up, but it's not going to add that much weight to it. And when I'm done, it'll be much easier for that hackle to travel smoothly along from the front of the wing to the back of the wing. I'm going to leave my thread behind, and I'm going to wind my hackle to my thread. And once I get there, I'm going to wind my thread through my hackle to give it extra strength. And the fly should last a little bit longer. Now I'm going to attach my hackle pliers, which I use the test clip. I love these for turning hackle. And I lost my tension there just for a second. If that happens to you, just pull again, start over again. Now I'm going to try to keep my tension, concentrate a little bit more, and wind these right up to the base of that wing. Try not to knock the fibers over, and then I'm going to come right to the back of the base of that wing. And these are going to stand out at almost a 90-degree angle for the traditional hackle fly. And once I have enough wraps, I'm going to firmly, I am pulling on that thread pretty hard. You can see I'm moving the hook. I'm going to keep that thread firm and go through right up to the back of that wing. And then I'm going to weave it through that hackle. And you can see I'm not tying down any of the hackle. They're staying right where they were. And I'm going to weave that forward up to the front where I'm going to complete my head of this fly. Now, to cut this little tag end off of the hackle, I'm going to use a utility knife. And if I have enough tension, I should just have to touch that. Well, my knife is dull, and I pulled the hackle out, so now I have to try to get a grip of it with my fingers. And give a little tension, a little sawing action, and that'll keep you from trimming off any of your hackles. You don't really want to cut them off with a pair of scissors. Now all I have to do is a whip finish and 2 or 3 turns should suffice here. I don't want a real heavy head so that the fly will fall on its head. I'm going to just put a little bit of super glue on the thread before I pull it under. And when I pull it under, that should make it a little bit more secure. And I'll use my utility knife. We'll just trim that, and that again, I don't have to cut any hackle off. And there we have a nice vertical wing. The hackles are the right length. They're standing out at 90 degrees. The tail is there, the length of the shank. The wing is the length of the shank. And actually the hackles are the length of the shank of the hook pretty much. As we turn it around and you look at it from head on, you can see what I've done with the wings by dividing them with the threads, and you can see the hackles are standing out. Will support that fly nicely as it rides through the ripples in the string. It's one pretty fly, and I hope it catches a lot of fish. And I hope you enjoyed the video, and I hope you give this method a try in your tying.